Tell your chemo wife she's gonna have to wait. I'm towing your fake vet van." The words hit like a slap across the parking lot. Doug Hammond didn't flinch. He just looked up, one good eye squinting under a faded camo cap, as Officer Troy Kemper laughed in his face. Phones were already recording. The tow truck was already backing into position, and Doug, sitting in his wheelchair beside a dusty green van with Combat Recon, K-Sun 71 stenciled on the side, reached into his dashboard. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. He pulled out a battered leather case, flipped it open, and began tapping a sequence onto a military-grade Morse transmitter. 3 bursts. 2 long pulses. Then silence. The static whisper of the desert wind returned. Doug closed the case and waited. 20 minutes earlier, the sun had barely broken through the low Utah haze when Doug rolled into the Flying J truck stop off I-80. A few truckers sipped gas station coffee, trailers hissed, and the American flag by the diesel lanes snapped lazily in the breeze. Doug's van pulled in slow, combat-worn, sand-stained, a legacy on wheels. He parked near the air pumps, same spot he always used. Close enough to reach the store, far enough not to block traffic. The van hissed down on hydraulic pistons as he activated the side ramp, then slid out in a worn titanium wheelchair that had seen 3 continents and 5 VA clinics. Every movement was precise, not rushed, not weak, just practiced. The Purple Heart license plate caught the morning light. The VA placard dangled from the mirror, laminated and weather-worn. A sticker on the back window read, "Semper Fi, Recon Never Quits." Doug made his way toward the store, passing by a patrol cruiser idling 2 rows over. He didn't notice the man inside watching him. Officer Troy Kemper, 37, wasn't new to being an asshole. 8 years on the force, 37 complaints, 0 consequences. His badge had survived chokeholds, verbal abuse, and 1 minor DUI, buried under union favors and internal silence. But what pissed him off more than anything? Fake vets. And something about Doug Hammond rubbed him the wrong way immediately. The placard, the custom van, the quiet dignity. He hated it. Doug re-emerged minutes later, balancing 2 waters and a pack of peanut butter crackers on his lap. Kemper stepped directly into his path. "I'm gonna need to see your handicapped placard and ID," he said, already smirking. Doug blinked. "It's on the mirror, same place it's been for the last 15 years. "License too," Kemper snapped. "Could have stolen it off someone." Doug handed over his VA card and license, saying nothing. Kemper gave them a theatrical glance. "So, you're supposed to be what? Some Purple Heart hero? That plate look real to you? Or did your nephew make it on Etsy?" Doug just looked at him. "I served," Doug said simply. Kemper snorted. "Yeah? Where? At a base laundromat?" Doug turned slightly, revealing the combat tattoo on his right arm. 3rd Recon Battalion, K-Sun. Kemper didn't care. He gestured to the tow truck driver just pulling in. "Hook it," he barked. "We got a stolen valor situation." The bystanders froze. One woman pulled out her phone. A young man on a Harley nearby started recording. Doug's eyes didn't waver. He shifted slightly and reached for the van door, opening a locked compartment on the dashboard. Inside, a leather case. Old, scratched. Inside the case, a Morse keyer. He plugged it into a small transceiver unit mounted just below the radio. Tap, 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 pause. Long, long pause. "Recon 1, Code Gray, I-80 eastbound." That was all. That's all he needed. Back outside, Kemper strutted in front of the van like he was the sheriff in a western. "You people think just 'cause you slap a sticker on your van, you get to park wherever you want?" Doug looked up, calm. "I have documentation. I've been using this van to take my wife to chemo for 3 months." "Oh, boo-hoo! Save the sob story, wheelchair boy." Kemper snapped. Silence. A sharp breath sucked in from one of the onlookers. That phrase would become the headline in the hours to come, but for now, it just hung in the air. Disgusting, blatant, raw. Doug said nothing. He just closed the case and slid it back inside the van. 4 minutes later, engines, low rumbles. 1 Harley, then 5, then 30. From every direction, the parking lot began to fill with motorcycles. Veterans in old jackets, patches worn thin. K-Sun, Fallujah, Desert Storm, Beirut. No one said a word. They just parked, stood, formed a perimeter around the tow truck, around Doug. Kemper turned, finally noticing. What the hell is this? The nearest man stepped forward. Old, Mexican-American, Marine tattoo visible on his neck. You touched the wrong recon, cop. The call didn't go through a phone line. It went through time, across static-laced frequencies, bouncing between dusty ham radios and military transceivers retrofitted into home basements, garage walls, and biker bars, hidden in deserts and small towns most Americans don't think about. 3 short bursts, 2 long pulses. Recon 1, Code Gray, I-80 eastbound. For most people, it would sound like random clicking. For a few, it was a war drum. 1. New Mexico, 8:37 a.m. Gustavo Gus Romero was rebuilding a carburetor with a cigarette dangling from his lips when his receiver buzzed. The signal punched through the static like a slap. He dropped the wrench. Doug. He hadn't heard from Hammond in over a year, not through code. He turned off the radio, wiped his hands on a rag, and grabbed his vest. The patch on the back said, 3rd Recon. K-Sun riders never left behind. He didn't even bother locking the garage. 2. Reno, Nevada, 8:38 a.m. Sandra Cross, retired gunnery sergeant, biker, widow, was halfway through her protein shake when her comms board lit up. Morse code, perfectly clean, unmistakable. She stood frozen for a second, then whispered, "Jesus, you really sent the call?" Within seconds, she was on her encrypted app. Recon Code Gray received. I-80, move. 3. Arizona, Idaho, Colorado. It was like flipping a breaker in a hidden country. Veterans from every corner of the West started moving. Some were working, some asleep. Some hadn't ridden in years. But when they got the code, they all dropped what they were doing. Because Recon 1 down wasn't a drill. It wasn't a joke. It meant one of their own had been disrespected publicly, and possibly in danger. They'd buried too many friends in silence. Not today. 4. Back at Flying J. 8:43 a.m. Doug sat in his chair, arms crossed, eyes fixed ahead. Not on Kemper. Not on the tow truck, which was now prepping chains under the van. Just steady, unshaken. Officer Kemper, on the other hand, was enjoying himself. He paced in front of the crowd forming behind phones. "Fraud like this is what clogs up the system," he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I see one-legged liars all day long. You know how easy it is to fake these tags?" Someone from the crowd yelled back, "He's got a Purple Heart, man." "Yeah, so do half the posers online," Kemper snapped, pointing at Doug. "What he's got is an ego problem and a very expensive van." Doug glanced sideways. The van, his lifeline, custom hydraulics, lowered floor, lift assist, custom hand controls. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was freedom. It was honor he could still control in a world that moved too fast for broken bodies. And Kemper was trying to drag it away like it meant nothing. 5. 8:45 a.m. First bike. The low growl cut across the lot. A single Harley. Matte black. Marine insignia hand-painted on the tank. A white man in his 70s, long gray braid, aviator shades. He didn't say a word. Just pulled up, parked facing the van. and killed the engine. 2 minutes later, another arrived. Then 3 more. Then 10. By 8:50 a.m., there were 23 bikes circling the Flying J lot. They weren't loud, they didn't shout, they didn't protest, they just sat, staring. Kemper started to notice. "What is this? Some kind of VA parade?" he muttered. Doug looked up for the first time in minutes. "They're here," he said quietly. 6. Who they were. This wasn't just any group of vets. This was the Biker Brotherhood, a loosely organized but highly coordinated network of former 3rd Recon Marines and their allies. Most people thought it was just a biker club. It wasn't. It was a distributed communications network, a mutual protection pact, and an informal ethics enforcement unit for veterans who'd been burned by red tape, bad cops, or bureaucratic indifference. They didn't march in parades. They didn't post flags on Facebook. They showed up when silence wasn't enough. 7. Kemper pushes further unbothered. Kemper waved at the tow truck. "Keep going. They're not law enforcement." The driver hesitated, then crawled forward. Chains scraped. Doug's van jolted slightly, and that's when the circle formed. Motorcycles boxed the truck in, front, back, side to side. No one raised a hand. No one said a word. It was silent, but heavy. The kind of pressure you can feel in your chest. Kemper stepped forward. "All right, move your damn bikes, or you're all getting citations for obstruction." A woman in desert camo leaned off her bike. "File it under, 'We fought for that right, officer.'" 8. Doug's power revealed. Doug finally wheeled forward. He didn't shout. He just pulled a worn black card from his wallet. Held it up. One of the bikers near him, a big man with an eye patch, let out a soft whistle. Kemper scoffed. "What is that? Bingo club membership?" A voice from the far end of the biker circle spoke up. "No, sir. That's Federal Security Authorization Clearance Level S5. You know what that means?" Kemper blinked. Another voice. "Means he has authority to activate audit holds on interagency funds tied to police departments. And guess what? This entire region just got flagged." Phones were up, streaming. It wasn't just about a van anymore. It was about power, quiet, real, legal. Doug had triggered something bigger than a parking lot standoff. 9. The van stops moving. The tow truck driver stepped out. "I'm not touching this vehicle," he said firmly. "You figure it out. I'm not losing my job over a war vet in a live stream." Kemper looked around. Half the crowd was filming. News vans had begun to appear at the lot entrance. And still, Doug said nothing. Only looked Kemper dead in the eyes and asked softly, "Do you really want to be the cop on record who ignored the Purple Heart, triggered a federal fund freeze, and tried to drag a combat vet's lifeline into the dirt?" 10. The 80th bike arrives. A final Harley rolled up, full dress uniform. Not a patch biker, a current Marine colonel. Name tag gleaming, J. Halbrook. He parked, got off, looked straight at Kemper. "You're done, son." The last Harley hadn't even gone quiet when Officer Troy Kemper reached for his holster. It wasn't dramatic, just a small instinctive shift, fingers grazing the grip, elbow angled slightly back. But in a parking lot full of combat veterans, that move landed like a grenade. Colonel Halbrook caught it instantly. "You really want to escalate this," he said coolly. "In front of 87 veterans, 3 live streams, and a growing media presence?" Kemper hesitated. His hand twitched, then dropped. He looked around and suddenly realized he wasn't in control anymore, not even close. Doug Hammond, still seated in his weathered titanium chair, didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He simply sat there, calm as stone, letting the moment fall into place without saying a word. Kemper's voice cracked the silence. "This is my scene. I don't care how many motorcycles show up. He's still getting towed." Doug finally spoke. His voice was low, even and unmistakably grounded. "You've made yourself clear, son. But I didn't summon these men and women. I just sent a signal. That's all." Kemper scoffed. "You think that makes you some kind of leader?" "No," Doug replied, staring straight at him. "It makes me someone who still believes in accountability." Across the lot, Sandra Cross's live stream ticked past 10,000 viewers. The comment section exploded. "Holy hell, this is real. He called a Purple Heart vet wheelchair boy? Tag every news outlet now. That's his van? For his chemo wife?" By the time the video clip of Kemper's mocking line, "Tell your chemo wife she'll have to wait," hit TikTok, it had already been clipped, stitched, and sent to veteran groups across the country. Twitter was on fire. Recon 1 down. Wheelchair boy at Purple Heart parking lot. The news cycle was starting to spin, and nobody could stop it now. At 9:05 a.m., 2 additional patrol cars rolled into the lot. No sirens, just lights. From the lead vehicle stepped Lieutenant Jenna Wyatt, mid-40s, sharp-cut uniform, and the kind of tired expression that said she'd dealt with enough internal disasters for one career. She spotted Kemper and went straight to him. "What the hell is this?" she asked low and fast. Kemper gestured toward Doug. "Guys faking disability. Fraudulent tags. Called in some sort of vet biker gang as backup. They're blocking the tow. That's obstruction." Wyatt frowned. "That guy?" She pointed to Doug. "With the prosthetic leg and VA placard hanging in full view?" "He could have bought all that," Kemper muttered. She stared at him for a long, uncomfortable second. "You're digging your own grave, Troy." Wyatt walked over to Doug. "Sir," she said respectfully. "Lieutenant Wyatt, Salt Lake County PD. May I see your documentation?" Doug nodded. "It's all in the glove compartment. VA registration, placard renewal, hospital records. Help yourself." A biker nearby handed her the keys. She opened the van door and took one look at the files inside. Combat service records, government-issued tags, a prescription order from the VA hospital addressed to Ann Hammond, Oncology Floor 4B. She closed the door and turned to the crowd. "He's legitimate," she said clearly. "Fully documented, verified veteran. This van is not being towed." Kemper's jaw clenched hard enough to crack a molar. "Then why the circus?" he barked. "This is intimidation. Look at them. This is coordinated." "No," Wyatt replied. "This is loyalty, and you caused it." Kemper stepped forward. "He froze our interagency fund access. That's federal tampering. He triggered a resource lockout. That's terrorism." The silence that followed was immediate. A few bikers leaned forward, like dogs hearing a noise they didn't like. Wyatt blinked in disbelief. "You just accused a decorated war vet of terrorism," she said slowly, "while being live-streamed after calling his Purple Heart fake and threatening to tow his only mode of transportation?" Kemper's face was red, his breath short. He couldn't back out, but he couldn't go forward either. Doug, still composed, rolled a few inches closer. "I didn't ask for cameras," he said. "Didn't ask for a crowd. All I wanted was to sit by my wife's hospital bed and read her Psalm 23 like I do every Tuesday." He paused. "You had a choice. You could have asked. You could have looked me in the eye and treated me like a man, but instead, you chose humiliation. You chose power." Doug looked around, not at the cops or the bikers, but the phones. The millions now watching. "And that's the freedom I fought for. Your right to be wrong. But freedom doesn't mean freedom from consequence." Back at headquarters, someone in the Interagency Oversight Office had been watching the stream too. Quietly, they triggered a Tier 2 federal media alert, a reserved status for potential civil rights violations involving veterans. Within 15 minutes, ABC News requested a mobile satellite team. NPR dispatched a national correspondent. The Associated Press dropped a breaking headline: "Purple Heart vet harassed at gas station. Federal security funds frozen in 6 states." Kemper panicked. He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, requesting escalation. Need backup. Tow needs to proceed. Scene compromised." Wyatt reached over and calmly pulled the radio from his hand. "You're done." "What?" he snapped. "You're relieved," she said. "Chief's orders. Hand over your badge and firearm. Now." "You don't have that authority," he hissed. "Yes, I do." Kemper stood frozen. Then, reluctantly, slowly, pulled his badge and sidearm, setting them down on the hood of his cruiser. Phones zoomed in from every angle. Doug didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He lifted a hand, softly, stopping the crowd from cheering. "No applause," he said. "This isn't victory. This is a mirror for all of us." People fell silent again. "Every time we let this kind of thing slide," he said, "we tell the next guy it's okay to treat a veteran like a burden, like we're exaggerating, like we're disposable." He looked at the van. The chains were still half hooked. "Not today." Colonel Halbrook stepped up beside him. "You want us to finish this?" he asked quietly. "Or do we let Washington handle it?" Doug looked around, at the bikers, the bystanders. The traffic backed up along I-80. A drone hovered overhead now, filming the entire thing. He looked up at the sky, that wide Utah blue stretching forever. Then he gave a single nod. "It's time." The sun had climbed higher by the time Colonel Halbrook finished his call. Doug sat quietly beside his van, hands folded in his lap, the wheels of his chair caked with Utah dust. Around him, the lot had transformed. The bikers weren't just standing guard anymore. They'd become a perimeter of silent protection, a formation of memory and muscle, flanked by media vans, onlookers, and more than one stunned highway patrol officer trying to process what the hell they were watching. Halbrook stepped close, speaking low. "It's done." They pulled the trigger. Doug gave a slow, steady nod. No words. 10 miles south, in a secure federal server facility near Provo, a technician in a Homeland badge and latex gloves hit execute. On screen, a chain reaction began rolling through the system. First Salt Lake County, then Clark County, Nevada, then Maricopa, Arizona. 6 states, 89 counties, $1.2 billion in pending disbursements locked cold. The screen flashed. Veto funding clause. Status: active. At that exact moment, in a quiet sheriff's office near Flagstaff, a finance officer blinked at his screen, then backspaced and refreshed. His entire Q2 budget had just vanished. The phone rang and kept ringing. Back in Utah, Doug didn't flinch. He just watched the way the wind moved the flag overhead, snapping hard one second, then hanging still the next. It reminded him of Khe-Sanh, of the first time he learned the difference between noise and power. He'd never raised his voice back then either, and yet he'd always been heard. At 9:47 a.m., CNN broke into regular programming with a red banner. Federal security funding frozen in 6 states after disabled vet harassed by Utah officer. On screen, a split shot. Doug sitting calmly beside his van. Officer Kemper mid-sneer, mid-live stream. Below them, the headline that would loop all day. The day the system got quiet. In Washington, a White House press staffer turned to her team. "Someone get us a background check on Douglas Hammond, like yesterday." Meanwhile, in the Salt Lake County governor's office, the air had gone tense. Governor Dale Forrester sat with his chief of staff, eyes scanning the rapid updates. "What's this about $1.2 billion? They froze the entire IA security grant flow," his aide said. "Every police department tied to the interagency network, suspended." "For how long?" "Until we issue a public apology, remove the officer, and comply with federal veteran conduct protocol." The governor leaned back, running a hand across his jaw. "Write the damn apology." Back in the parking lot, a man in a Fox News polo tried to get Doug to do a live sit-down. Doug declined, politely. A reporter from NPR handed him a letter, an invitation to speak before the House Veterans Affairs Committee. Doug folded it, placed it in his pocket, and said he'd think about it. He wasn't there to make statements. He was there because something wrong had happened, and silence in that moment would have been betrayal. Someone handed him a mic. He looked at it, then passed it back. Instead, he wheeled forward a few inches and let his voice carry without amplification. "I didn't freeze those funds to punish anyone," he said, his voice steady. "I froze them to remind this country what it promised us." A murmur ran through the crowd. "I gave a leg in '71. Others gave more. And most of us came home to silence. I won't sit through that silence again while officers with a badge think they can drag our names through the dirt." He pulled something from his front pocket, a faded fabric patch, the kind worn on the right shoulder of a combat blouse. The flag reversed so it faces forward in battle. Doug held it up. "This is not a sticker. It's not a brand. It's not for decoration. It means something, and today, that meaning is what shut down your system." The lot went still. Then one voice from the far side of the circle spoke, quiet but clear. "Semper Fi." It wasn't a chant, not at first, but it rippled. Semper Fi, Semper Fi, Semper Fi. Doug didn't smile, but he let his eyes soften. That was enough. Hours passed. The live stream kept rolling. TikTok circulated like wildfire. Headlines rotated every 30 minutes. CNN, MSNBC, Newsmax. Even overseas press started asking questions. By early afternoon, the Office of Veteran Ethics Compliance released a memo. All federal security grants would now be tied to a new clause, the Hammond provision, requiring mandatory ethics training for all public safety personnel interacting with military veterans. The document would be distributed to every police chief, sheriff, and state director receiving federal funds. It would begin with Doug's name in the header. Elsewhere, Officer Kemper sat in a gray interview room at Internal Affairs. The room was sterile. No clock, no badge, no gun. On the screen in front of him, footage of his own face calling a double amputee veteran wheelchair boy. His lawyer sat beside him, tense. "They're talking civil rights charges," she said quietly. "Disability discrimination under color of authority. It's federal. It's real." Kemper didn't speak. He just kept watching the tape. Back outside, Doug's van sat untouched. The tow truck had left an hour ago after the driver shook Doug's hand and apologized. Twice. The bikers were starting to peel away now, one by one. Quiet, unassuming. There were no banners, no hashtags painted across windshields, just nods, handshakes, salutes without words. Colonel Halbrook clapped Doug's shoulder gently. "We've got your 6. You want anything escalated? Just say the word." Doug looked toward the road, then back toward the hospital in the distance. "No need," he said. He eased into the van. It groaned a little, like it always did. Same lift, same seat, same dashboard with the Morse keyer tucked neatly inside. In the passenger seat sat a bag with 2 water bottles and a pack of peanut butter crackers, just like when he left that morning. 20 minutes later, he was at Anne's bedside. She was awake, just barely, but smiled when he entered. He kissed her forehead, pulled the curtain for privacy, and opened his Bible. Psalm 23, same page, same voice, same vow. He would walk through the valley, even with only one leg. Hoy ChatGPT. The U.S. Capitol was colder than Doug expected. Not in temperature, he was dressed fine for D.C.'s spring wind, but in feeling. Polished, sterile, all marble and posture. Every hallway echoed like a museum. Everyone moved fast, but talked slow. Too slow. It reminded him of field command centers during the war, everyone trying to look calm while the maps changed every hour. He didn't want to be here. He'd said no to the press, declined sit-downs with national anchors, ignored offers from book agents, but this wasn't that. This was the House Subcommittee on Interagency Ethics and Federal Security Distribution. They controlled the very system he'd helped build decades ago, the same system he'd frozen, with one signal. He owed them an explanation, and maybe, just maybe, this was the moment to make sure what happened to him never happened to another vet again. They'd given him a simple chair, No back cushion. A microphone that smelled faintly like bleach. Someone offered him water, which he politely declined. A row of congressional aides sat behind him, eyes fixed on tablets and whispering into earpieces. Across the long table, 5 lawmakers, each with the plastic smile of media training and the tense shoulders of people trying to look bipartisan. The chairwoman, Rep. Elaine Preston from Oregon, cleared her throat. "Mr. Hammond, thank you for coming." Doug nodded, slow. "Didn't fly in for the sightseeing." A couple aides chuckled nervously. Someone typed something fast. Preston leaned forward. "You understand, of course, the seriousness of what your veto funding action triggered." Doug looked her straight in the eye. "Yes, ma'am, and I stand by it." Another congressman, a younger one, blazer too tight, cut in. "You realize 6 states lost access to over $1 billion in security funds?" Doug didn't blink, and every one of them had the ability to prevent that from happening. Silence. Representative Preston tilted her head. "Could you clarify that?" Doug took a breath. His voice was steady, slow, not rehearsed, but deliberate. "The system I helped design was never just about dollars. It was about values. We built the interagency grant with one core assumption, that public servants receiving federal funds would uphold basic ethical standards. That includes how they treat disabled veterans." He paused. "What happened to me at that gas station wasn't just disrespect. It was a symptom of how easy it's become for the people who never served to forget those who did." Someone in the gallery nodded. A reporter whispered into their mic. Doug leaned forward. "I didn't pull that lever out of ego or anger. I pulled it because I knew that if I let it slide, if I just rolled away quietly, then I was signing off on that officer's behavior, and the next veteran in line might not have a van to lose, might not make it home at all." Representative Jamal Whitaker from Georgia interjected, his voice softer. "Mr. Hammond, would you support legislation to formally integrate that ethics trigger into permanent law?" Doug studied him. "You mean, make the veto clause available beyond me?" Whitaker nodded. "Yes, sir." Doug exhaled slowly. "Only if it's accompanied by something bigger. Funding triggers won't stop discrimination. Training will, oversight will, and consequences that come before someone loses their legs or their dignity." The room went quiet. Preston looked down at her folder, then back up. "We're drafting a bill, tentatively titled the Hammond Act." Doug didn't react. "It would require all federal funding recipients in law enforcement or public safety to adopt a certified veteran respect compliance protocol. Officers would be trained in identifying service-related disability, trauma response, and respectful engagement. Any department failing that certification would be temporarily suspended from all interagency financial support." Doug let the words sink in. "And that protocol," she added, "would be built with your input, if you're willing." He nodded once. No big gesture, no media-ready quote. Just, "I'm in." That afternoon, the news dropped. Congress proposes Hammond Act to protect veterans from discrimination. Bipartisan support surges as Doug Hammond testifies on Capitol Hill. Social media lit up again. This time, not with anger, but with momentum. Hammond Act now must protect our vets. Never Toe Honor VA clinics shared the video. Military families stitched his testimony into reels. Young soldiers, some not even born when Doug last wore a uniform, posted thank you videos. Doug stayed quiet. He declined all requests for interviews. He flew back to Utah that night, took a taxi home instead of waiting for any caravan. No cameras greeted him. He preferred it that way. Meanwhile, in a courtroom back in Salt Lake City, Officer Troy Kemper was arraigned on multiple charges: violation of civil rights under color of law, disability-based discrimination, obstruction of lawful access to medical care, ethics fraud, falsification of internal compliance training certifications. His defense team tried to paint the incident as a misunderstanding escalated by online pressure. But the judge wasn't having it, especially not after reviewing the footage. especially not after reading the Morrison and Hammond protocols, which had both been activated in less than a year due to officer misconduct against veterans. Doug didn't attend the hearing. He didn't need to. A week later, a small plaque was installed at the Flying J station off I-80, right where the confrontation happened. It read, "This ground is a reminder. You can tow a vehicle, but you can't tow away honor." In recognition of Douglas Hammond Combat Recon, K-Sun, 3rd Marine Division, who reminded us what accountability looks like. Doug didn't go to the ceremony either. He was in the hospital again. Anne had taken a rough turn. He sat by her side, as always, reading Psalm 23, brushing her hair, holding her hand through the stillness. When the nurse told him about the plaque, he just nodded. "I didn't do it for that," he said. She smiled gently. "We know." That night, back home, Doug turned on the old radio in his garage. The one with the Morse keyer still wired to a dusty antenna that barely picked up AM stations anymore. He tapped 3 short bursts, 2 long ones, then nothing. He didn't need a reply. He just wanted the Brotherhood to know he was home. The fight was over, and this time they'd won without ever firing a shot. The first threat came in the form of a voicemail. Blocked number. Raspy voice. No curse words, but the tone was clear. "You think you can pull strings and ruin lives from your wheelchair? We've got eyes on you, old man. Careful where you roll." Doug deleted it without flinching. He didn't show it to Anne. He didn't even mention it to Halbrook. But that was just the beginning. 3 days later, a headline flashed across several conservative outlets. "Who is Doug Hammond really? Disabled Marine or federal puppet?" The article was a mix of old records, twisted facts, and outright lies, accusing Doug of being on secret payrolls, implying the veto clause was an abuse of federal power, and suggesting that Doug's actions had crippled public safety operations across 6 states. "They're building a narrative," Halbrook warned. "Classic play. Discredit the man, dilute the message." Doug just sighed. "Let him. I'm not running for office." But the real hit came when 3 states, Texas, Idaho, and Wyoming, filed a joint injunction to challenge the constitutionality of the veto funding clause. They weren't just angry. They were coming for him. Back in Utah, Doug was trying to live like things were normal, which, of course, they weren't. Anne had another episode, this time worse. She collapsed in the kitchen while trying to get to the sink. By the time Doug got to her, she was barely breathing. He called 911, his hands shaking for the first time since '72. The ER was quiet, sterile. Doug sat in the corner, his uniform cap folded in his lap. A nurse walked by and did a double take. You're that vet from TV, right?" Doug nodded, not looking up. "Not today." She didn't bother him again. The doctor came out 2 hours later, stable but weak. She'd need to stay for observation. Doug went in and sat by her side, brushing her hand with his thumb. "I didn't sign up for the spotlight, Annie," he whispered. "I just wanted them to remember what we gave." Anne stirred, her eyes fluttering. "You didn't give it for you," she murmured. "You gave it for the next ones." Then she slipped back asleep. Doug didn't move. 2 mornings later, a letter arrived at his door. No return address. Handwritten. Inside was a simple note. "Dear Mr. Hammond, my name is Casey. I'm 19. I joined the Marines because of my granddad. He died before I graduated boot camp. But he always said there's no honor in silence. When I saw you on the news, I finally got what he meant. They're coming for you. But I'm writing to tell you, we got your 6. If you ever speak again, know there's 1,000 of us listening. With respect, LCPL Casey Monroe, USMC." Doug stared at the letter for a long while. Then he folded it carefully and slipped it into the front pocket of his flannel shirt. By that afternoon, his mailbox was full. Not threats this time, but letters like Casey's. Hundreds, then thousands. from veterans, widows, students, nurses, mechanics, kids. They came from all 50 states, some with photos, others with folded flags. One had dog tags inside. They all said the same thing: "We remember, and we stand with you." Halbrook showed up that evening with a federal envelope in his hand. "They want you to speak again." Doug looked at him. "Where?" "The Public Oversight Forum. National TV, 2 weeks from now." Doug hesitated. "Congressional Pressures Building," Halbrook continued. "They want to kill the Hammond Act before it gets to full vote. If you don't speak, if the people don't see you again, it might die on the floor." Doug leaned back, wheels creaking. "I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," Halbrook said gently. "But maybe that's why they're listening." Silence filled the room. Then Doug stood, his frame slow but steady, and nodded once. "I'll speak, but this time, I won't speak for me." The prep for the forum began. A media consultant was assigned, though Doug ignored half her advice. "You need bullet points, Mr. Hammond?" "I've got one," he replied. Respect. At the same time, online attacks escalated. Comment sections filled with slurs. Conspiracy posts went viral, claiming Doug never served or that his injury was faked. A grainy image of his Khe-Sanh deployment letter shut that down quick. Veterans all across the internet rallied again. A new hashtag started trending: Hammond stands. And the caption on most posts? "He gave a leg. He gave his silence. Now he gives us all a voice." 2 nights before the forum, Doug sat by Anne's hospital bed again. Her breathing was shallow but steady. He brought her favorite blanket. He brought his Bible. But most importantly, he brought the letter from Casey. He read it to her out loud. Anne squeezed his hand. "I'll be watching," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Doug smiled. "I know." Doug sat in the green room behind the forum stage, staring at his reflection in the vanity mirror. He looked tired, older than last month. The lines in his face had gotten deeper, or maybe he just noticed them more now. He adjusted the marine pin on his lapel, wiped his palms on his slacks, then looked at the card they gave him. "Mr. Hammond, you will have 12 minutes. Stick to prepared remarks. Avoid political attacks." Doug chuckled and slid the card into his coat pocket, unread. He hadn't prepared a speech. He had a truth, and that was enough. Outside, the stage was set like a political convention. Red, white, and blue banners. 2 moderators at a long table. Dozens of cameras. Over 30 million viewers expected to watch live across the country. One seat was marked, "Mr. Douglas Hammond, decorated veteran." The host cleared her throat. "Our next speaker doesn't hold elected office. He's not a lawyer or an economist. He's a man who served his country, lost part of himself doing so, and, until recently, lived in near total obscurity." She turned toward the curtain. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sergeant Douglas Hammond." The curtain parted, and Doug rolled out. No teleprompter, no speechwriter. Just a small American flag on his chest and a fire in his gut. The room fell silent. Doug adjusted the mic, looked out at the cameras, then took a long breath. He didn't smile. He didn't blink much. But his voice, when it came, was steady as steel. "I wasn't supposed to be here today. Hell, I wasn't even supposed to make it home." A pause. "I joined the Marines at 17. I lied about my age. Back then you could get away with it if you looked old enough and walked like you had somewhere to be." Laughter in the audience. Doug didn't laugh. 6 tours, Iraq, Desert Storm, Helmand. I saw good men bleed for zip codes most Americans never heard of. I lost brothers in sand, in jungle, in hospital rooms that smelled like bleach and silence. His hands gripped the chair. And when I came back, I lost other things. My legs, eventually. Some memory. A little dignity, too. He let that sit. And still, I didn't ask for anything. Until a month ago, he continued, when I stopped for gas in Utah, and a cop decided that because I didn't move fast enough or talk loud enough or maybe didn't look white enough for his taste, that I didn't deserve respect. A ripple through the room. Doug leaned forward. He mocked my service, laughed at my van, called me dead weight, then had my only mode of transport towed while I sat there, too stunned to answer. He paused again. But this story isn't about me. It's about all the people who wore a uniform and came home to find that their country forgot what that uniform meant. Doug's voice grew firmer. We don't need medals. We don't need parades. We damn sure don't need pity. He looked straight into the camera. What we need is respect. The kind that doesn't vanish once we take off the camo. The kind that doesn't depend on whether we can walk straight or speak without shaking. Someone clapped in the back. Another followed. Then the room stilled again. Doug looked down for a second, then pulled a folded letter from his pocket. He held it up. This letter came from a Marine named Casey, 19 years old. Said his granddad taught him that silence is a coward's comfort. And when he saw my story, he understood that for the first time. He looked back up. Well, Casey, I'm here because you're right. I broke my silence, and now I'm asking this country to do the same. He turned to the panel of lawmakers at the side of the stage. You've got a bill in front of you, the Hammond Act. It ain't perfect, it won't fix the world overnight, but it's a start. A damn good one. He jabbed a finger toward the crowd, not in anger, but in urgency. You don't pass that bill for me. You pass it for every kid who came home missing a limb and got told to park in the back lot like they were disposable. For every woman who served in silence and came back to find her VA clinic had no ramp. For every vet who ended up homeless under a bridge wearing the same boots they marched in. His voice cracked. Just once. We gave you everything we had. Now we're just asking you to remember. The moderator, visibly emotional, leaned in. Sergeant Hammond, do you have any final words? Doug thought for a second, then nodded. 1. He turned to face the nation. Enough! Then he wheeled back. The forum exploded. Not in noise, but in movement. Lawmakers on their phones. Twitter lit up like wildfire. Veterans across the country posted side-by-side photos of themselves in uniform and after discharge with the caption, "We are not invisible, we are not broken, and we've had enough. Hammond Act now." By midnight, clips from Doug's speech had over 46 million views. A coalition of 47 veteran groups released a joint statement demanding the bill pass without delay. The next morning, 5 senators who previously opposed the Hammond Act reversed course on live TV. After hearing Sergeant Hammond, one of them said, I realized the vote is not about policy. It's about honor. Meanwhile, back in Utah, Anne sat in a hospital bed watching the rerun of the speech. She smiled softly, even as an oxygen line tugged at her cheek. That's my Doug, she whispered. Never loud, but always heard. It was just past 7:30 a.m. when Halbrook burst into the living room, tie askew, coat flapping like a man dodging bullets. Doug was in the kitchen, stirring oatmeal slowly, his eyes still on the muted TV replaying his forum speech. He didn't flinch as Halbrook spoke. They're coming harder now. Top-tier donors, energy lobbies, even Homeland Security's getting pressure. Doug sipped his coffee. What kind of pressure? Threats to block federal funding if the Hammond Act passes. Quiet ones, off the record, but real. Doug stared at his spoon. That all? Halbrook sat down, breath heavy. There's more. A leak. Doug raised an eyebrow. An email thread surfaced this morning, Halbrook said, pulling up his phone. Supposedly, you once called the VA system a corrupt graveyard. Doug nodded slowly. Because I did. Halbrook blinked. You did? Yeah, back in 2008. My friend Jalen died waiting for a heart consult. 2 years of red tape. I wrote a letter, used those words. Meant every one of them. Halbrook ran a hand over his face. Well, they're twisting it, saying it shows bias, that you're unfit to represent vets. Doug stood quietly. The kettle clicked off behind him. Let them twist. I've been twisted worse by an IED. By noon, the smear campaign was full-blown. A PAC called Veterans for Order launched attack ads with ominous music and black and white footage of Doug raising his fist at the forum. "Do we want a man who calls our systems corrupt graveyards? Writing national law?" Another headline from a major news network. "Hammond unhinged, VA criticism raises questions of motive." Doug wasn't surprised, but he was angry. Not for himself, but for the countless veterans who had written similar letters, cried in hospital parking lots, or buried friends too soon. That evening, Halbrook returned with another envelope, this time from the Senate Rules Committee. "They want to delay the vote," he said, handing it over. "Pending investigation into your conduct and potential misconduct on becoming a federal advisor." Doug chuckled bitterly. "I lost 2 legs serving a flag they now think I'm unbecoming to stand near." Halbrook didn't laugh. "They're playing long ball. Delays kill momentum. You disappear from the news cycle, they bury the bill in procedural hell." Doug stared at the envelope. "Then we don't disappear." But Halbrook looked hesitant. "There's another option. Tactical retreat." Doug narrowed his eyes. "You take a step back. Issue a statement calling for unity. Remove your name from the act. Say the message is more important than the messenger. The bill might still pass, just not with you at the center." Doug didn't answer. He just looked out the window toward the Wasatch Mountains, their peaks frosted and still. After a long silence, he finally said, "And what happens to the next guy who speaks up? Or the next woman who rolls into a VA clinic and says the wrong thing too loud?" Halbrook didn't respond. He didn't have to. Doug already knew. Later that night, Doug visited the Salt Lake Veterans Shelter. He liked going there late. Fewer speeches, fewer cameras. Just humans and silence. That's where he met Marcus. Mid-30s, black, broad shoulders, but eyes like cracked glass. He sat alone at the corner of the room, fiddling with an old dog tag like it still had blood on it. Doug rolled over. "You Army?" "Marines," Marcus replied, not looking up. Doug nodded. "Hoorah." Marcus finally glanced at him. "You're Hammond." "Some days, yeah." The two sat in silence. Then Marcus spoke. "They booted me for PTSD. No hearing, no benefits. One night I punched a wall during a flashback. Next morning I was off payroll." Doug listened. "No one believed me. No one cared. Then I saw your speech. First time I didn't feel invisible." Doug leaned in. "Then don't disappear again." That night, back home, Doug lit a fire in the hearth and opened the case holding his bronze star. He hadn't touched it in years. He stared at the inscription, "For gallantry and devotion to duty under hostile fire." He whispered to no one in particular. Funny how fire follows you even decades later. Then he looked at his reflection in the glass. Time-worn, battle-tested, not perfect, but unafraid. The next morning, Doug called Halbrook. "Set the cameras back up." Halbrook hesitated. "You sure?" "Not even a little, but we do it anyway." "What do you want to say?" Doug stared out the window as a hawk soared above the snow. "Nothing new, just louder." By afternoon, Doug posted a video on his social channel. No music, no graphics, just him in a plain backdrop. He spoke directly into the lens. "If telling the truth about broken systems disqualifies me, then every vet who's ever begged for decent care is disqualified too. If we let fear write our laws, we'll have a country of silence. I won't be silent." The video went viral. Again, celebrities reposted it. Combat medics stitched it with their own stories. Even military spouses chimed in. And beneath all of it, the same phrase kept repeating, "We won't be silent either. Hammond, act now." The rotunda of the Capitol echoed with footsteps, hushed conversations, and the occasional bark from a security officer. Doug Hammond rolled down the marble corridor slowly, flanked by Halbrook and a retired Army captain named Teresa Ewan. Press cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But Doug didn't look left or right. His eyes were set straight ahead, the hearing room. Inside, the room buzzed with tension. The brass nameplate on the table read, Federal Oversight Committee. Special session on the Hammond Act. 11 senators sat behind a long, arc-shaped desk, flanked by aides and legal advisors. Doug was led to the center table. No nameplate, just a glass of water and a single microphone. The chairwoman tapped the gavel. This hearing will come to order. An older senator, Congressman Avery Malloy of Louisiana, leaned forward first. White hair, pinstripe suit, and a smirk that felt preloaded. Mr. Hammond, he began, you've become somewhat of a folk hero lately. Doug didn't respond. Malloy continued, but would you agree that sometimes public sentiment doesn't equal sound legislation? Doug kept his voice even. Sometimes, but sometimes public sentiment is the only reason legislation moves at all. A murmur through the crowd. Malloy raised an eyebrow. And would you also agree, Malloy said, emphasizing each syllable, that calling the VA a corrupt graveyard is perhaps ungrateful? Doug took a sip of water. I didn't say that to be ungrateful, sir. I said it because I buried 4 friends in the time it took the VA to return a phone call. Gasps in the room. Some reporters stopped typing. Malloy leaned back, but his tone grew sharper. Mr. Hammond, you speak of patriotism, but what about discipline? About respect for institutions? What kind of soldier undermines the very structure he swore to defend? Doug took a breath, and instead of responding with argument, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. It wasn't a prepared statement. It was a letter. He unfolded it slowly, then laid it flat on the table. This is from Corporal Devin Wyatt, he said. We served together in Kandahar. He was 22, lost part of his spine from an IED right before Christmas. He looked up. I visited him every Tuesday when I got back stateside. Sat in that hospital with his mom, fed him applesauce when he couldn't move his hands. He'd cry sometimes, not because of the pain, but because the elevator to his floor hadn't worked in 4 weeks, and the janitor told him, just use the stairs, man. Doug's voice cracked. Devin killed himself 3 days before his medical evaluation. Silence. Deafening silence. I didn't say corrupt because I hate this country. I said it because Devin loved this country and it forgot him. The room shifted. Even Senator Malloy looked down for a moment, then adjusted his cuffs like they were suddenly too tight. Another senator, Senator Clark, known for her quiet stance, leaned forward and activated her mic. Mr. Hammond, she said, her voice more gentle than anyone expected. What do you believe would have saved Corporal Wyatt? Doug looked her in the eye. Dignity. A pause. Dignity is faster than funding. You can pass all the budget increases you want, but if the staff treats a soldier like a burden instead of a human being, the system is still broken. For a long moment, no one said anything. The chairwoman, Senator Evelyn Martinez, a Latina veteran from Texas, finally cleared her throat. This committee will recess for 15 minutes. Doug turned to Halbrook, who whispered quickly, You just turned a maybe vote into a yes. Doug nodded, but he didn't smile. He glanced over to the audience gallery and spotted someone in the back. A young man, clean-shaven, clearly military, holding a folded American flag on his lap, eyes red, hands trembling. Doug didn't know his name, but he knew his story. When the hearing resumed, Senator Clark requested time to speak. She looked out at the audience, then directly into the live cameras. I have not previously taken a position on the Hammond Act, she said. But after today, I can no longer stay neutral. I support it fully, and I encourage my colleagues to stop posturing and start protecting. The room buzzed. That one line, I can no longer stay neutral, went viral within minutes. By evening, hashtags like #dignity is faster and #justice for Devin trended nationwide. News anchors replayed Doug's story. Newspapers ran side-by-side photos of Doug and Devin with headlines like, One spoke, one was silenced, how many more? The Oversight Committee announced they would expedite a vote on the bill within the next 7 days. And for the first time since the smear campaign began, the tone around the Hammond Act shifted from doubt to inevitability. That night, Doug returned home to find a voicemail waiting. It was from Marcus, the vet he met at the shelter. "Hey, Sarge. I saw the hearing," Marcus said, voice hoarse. "I just wanted you to know I applied to a housing program today. First time in 5 years I felt like maybe I deserved a roof again." Doug sat with the message for a while. Then he hit play again, and again, and again. It happened on a quiet Monday morning. Doug was folding laundry when his phone lit up with a single text from Halbrook. "Turn on the news, now." Doug grabbed the remote. Within seconds, every national outlet was flashing the same headline. Pentagon official leaked emails reveal pressure campaign against Hammond Act, CNN, MSNBC. Even conservative outlets. The leak was massive. A bundle of internal emails, meeting transcripts, and interagency memos showing that several defense contractors, police lobbyists, and PACs had coordinated behind the scenes to kill the bill. Worse, they had offered incentives to swing vote senators, private jet flights, consulting positions, donations cloaked through shell nonprofits. The source? An anonymous whistleblower from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Doug sat motionless. The same men who called him unfit were now exposed. Not just for blocking reform, but for selling out the dignity of disabled veterans for personal gain. That afternoon, protesters began gathering outside state capitals in over a dozen cities. Salt Lake, Raleigh, Phoenix. Even DC veterans came in wheelchairs, with oxygen tanks, in full dress blues. They carried signs that read, "I am not a pawn." Devon deserved better. Pass the Hammond Act, no more delays. By sunset, a news drone hovered over the Capitol. The marble steps were packed shoulder to shoulder with veterans and civilians. Some brought photos of their fallen friends. Some simply stood in silence. Doug's arrived late, quiet, almost unnoticed, until a young vet in uniform spotted him and shouted, "He's here!" The crowd erupted. People moved aside as Doug rolled through, nodding gently, pausing to clasp a few hands. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His presence was the speech. Meanwhile, inside the Capitol, the scandal boiled over. The Office of Government Ethics launched a formal investigation into 5 senators. One of them, Senator Malloy, quietly announced his resignation the next morning. Halbrook texted Doug just one word: checkmate. That night, on national television, Chairwoman Martinez addressed the country. She stood solemnly at a podium with the American flag behind her. "We cannot legislate dignity into every corner of this nation," she said. "But we can start here." Then she paused. "And we can start now." The Senate reconvened the next morning for a full vote. In a rare moment of bipartisan alignment, the Hammond Act passed with a supermajority, 81-19. Applause broke out in the chamber. Some cried. One senator placed his hand on Doug's shoulder and whispered, "You just changed the law for a generation." But Doug didn't celebrate right away. He waited until nightfall, sitting outside his home under a sky full of stars. No reporters, no lights, just him. And Devon's letter beside him. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "We didn't win. We just started." Doug sat in the garage. The door cracked open just enough to let in the late afternoon sun. His hands were smudged with grease, radio parts scattered across the workbench. Classic jazz hummed from an old speaker, filling the silence like a familiar companion. Then came the knock. Not urgent, not casual, just respectful. Doug wiped his hands on a rag and rolled to the door. Standing on the porch was a sharply dressed man in a dark suit, an envelope in one hand and a badge on his belt. "Mr. Hammond," the man said with a nod. "Special Agent Curtis. I was asked to deliver this personally." Doug looked him up and down. "Asked by who?" Curtis handed him the envelope. The White House. Doug didn't open it immediately. He waited until Curtis was gone. The government car vanished down the block. Then he rolled back inside and opened it under the soft glow of a desk lamp. The letterhead was unmistakable, bold, elegant, presidential. Doug read it twice before setting it down. Then he read it a third time. The president had invited him to speak at the upcoming signing ceremony for the Hammond Act, not just as a guest, but as the keynote speaker. The letter wasn't written like a political formality. It was personal. It referenced Devin Wyatt. It acknowledged the protest. It even mentioned Doug's radio repair hobby. At the bottom, in blue ink, was a handwritten line. "We failed too many. You reminded us what dignity looks like. J. Prescott, President of the United States." The next morning, Halbrook called. "You're going, right?" he asked. Doug hesitated. "I'm not a politician. I don't want to be one." "You're not. You're a lighthouse." Doug chuckled. "That's your fancy way of saying, get on the damn plane?" "Exactly." The ceremony was held at the National Mall. A stage had been built near the World War II memorial, with rows of folding chairs stretching out toward the Washington Monument. As Doug rolled onto the platform, the crowd stood. Veterans, Gold Star families, nurses, lawmakers, kids holding up hand-drawn signs that said, "Thank you, Mr. Hammond." Doug didn't speak from a teleprompter. He didn't even hold notes. He spoke like a man who had carried silence for too long and had finally found the right words. "I didn't come here today as a hero," he began. "I came here as a man who watched too many heroes come home to nothing. No help, no honor, just red tape and locked doors." He paused, looking out at the faces watching him. "This law won't fix everything. It won't erase every mistake, but it sends a signal to the men and women still wearing the uniform and the ones who already hung it up." Another pause. "You matter, and we're finally acting like it." When the president took the podium afterward, he didn't talk about votes or chambers or political wins. He turned toward Doug, handed him the pen used to sign the bill, and said, "History is written by those who refuse to stay quiet. Today, we write it in ink, but it started with your silence." After the ceremony, Doug was approached by a woman in her 20s. Her eyes were red, and she clutched a folded flag to her chest. "My brother was in Devin's unit," she said softly. "He told me how you used to bring him music CDs and crossword puzzles, said you never missed a Tuesday." Doug's throat tightened. "I tried to show up," he said quietly. "You did?" She nodded. "You showed up for all of us." That night, back home, Doug didn't turn on the news. He sat on the porch, coffee in hand, looking out at the quiet Utah sky. And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt full. Doug didn't think much of the manila envelope that showed up 2 weeks after the ceremony. No badge this time, no knock at the door. Just slid through the mail slot like any other letter. He opened it with one hand while stirring his coffee with the other. Inside was a letter. Short, direct. No presidential seal. Just a small logo at the top. Federal Office of Veteran Transition and Ethics. Doug read the opening line and sat back in his chair. "We'd like to propose a partnership, one that builds something permanent, something dignified." They weren't asking for speeches or handshakes. They were asking Doug to help design and lead a new national initiative. The Dignity Bridge Program, a first-of-its-kind civilian-military transition network rooted in ethics, accessibility, and purpose. It would serve as a federal model for how America welcomes veterans home, offering housing, job placement, trauma support, and a watchdog system to report public discrimination. All connected through a secure national platform, and they wanted him at the helm. Doug didn't say yes immediately. He flew to Arlington first, not to visit a senator or shake hands, but to sit by a headstone. Devin Wyatt's grave was quiet, shaded by a line of trees. A single flag was tucked in the soil beside it, faded but upright. Doug stayed for hours. He didn't speak aloud. but the answer started forming in his chest. By the end of the week, he had packed his things. Halbrook met him at the airport. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," Doug said with a dry smile. "But I was sure I couldn't keep just fixing radios forever." Halbrook looked at him. "You ever think this was the mission?" Doug gave a tired but knowing nod. Every vet's got one last op. The rollout of Dignity Bridge was quiet at first. A pilot program launched in 4 cities: Denver, Charlotte, Tucson, and Buffalo. Doug insisted on including both red and blue states, because Dignity doesn't wear a party pin. Within 3 months, the results were already speaking. 2,300 veterans housed 700-plus jobs placed through civilian military employer networks, 5 officers fired for misconduct after veterans used the reporting platform. Doug didn't go on press tours. He didn't care for headlines. He visited the sites in person, quietly, met with staff, listened more than he spoke. And every time he walked into a new branch, the team would greet him not as a director, but with a salute. Then came the call. A House Committee on Veteran Affairs was holding a hearing on nationwide veteran protections, and Doug was asked to testify. He sat in front of the panel in his dress blues, medals neatly aligned, sleeves rolled up just enough to show the scars. One congressman, skeptical, polished, leaned forward and asked, "Mr. Hammond, with all due respect, how do you know this isn't just another government patch job?" Doug didn't flinch, because this patch was sewn by the men and women who bled through the last one. Silence filled the room. The hearing was televised. Clips went viral. And within 48 hours, Dignity Bridge was approved for federal expansion into 26 states. That summer, Doug received an invitation to the White House, not for an award, not for a photo, but for a private dinner with the president. No press, no cameras, just conversation. Over grilled salmon and black coffee, the president asked him, "What do you want to see 10 years from now?" Doug thought for a moment, then answered, softly but firmly, "I want to see a kid walk past a vet in a wheelchair and not stare, just nod, like he gets it. I want VA offices that feel more like welcome centers and less like DMV lines. I want cops trained to see PTSD, not just resistance. I want a country that doesn't wait for a viral video to do the right thing." When Doug returned home that night, he sat by his old radio bench, tools still dusty, the dial still tuned to static. But something was different now. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was fixing broken things. He was building something new, something future-facing, and he wasn't alone. Across the country, veterans began referring to the new movement by a different name, not Dignity Bridge. They called it the Hammond Standard. A symbol not just of reform, but of what happens when quiet endurance becomes national resolve. What would you have done if you saw that veteran being mocked in a parking lot? Would you speak up or stay quiet like the crowd? Tell us in the comments, do you think America does enough for its veterans? Or are we still failing them every day? And most importantly, what does dignity mean to you?